Welcome to We Are Everyone, a video and podcast series powered by Pivotal Moments, and we focus on the intersection of mental wellness in the workforce. We bring together young professionals and mindful executive mentors to bridge the generational gap and bring to the surface conversations about the importance of mental wellness and how to overcome career tradition challenges. Mental wellness is paramount. Join us. Welcome to We Are Everyone / Mental Recess. This is the Mental Recess show hosted by the We Are Everyone channel. I'm your host, Jenn Sherman, and we have a very special guest on today. I believe, Sydney, you're in Texas now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
so I'm in Lubbock, Texas, and it's about 103 degrees today.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's a hot one. I just wasn't sure just with virtual everything, you can do school from anywhere. So we have Sydney Brammer, right? Brammer. Okay.
Yes.
Brammer. Sydney Brammer. She's a doctoral student at Texas Tech University. And she's pursuing her PhD right now. But before that, you received an MA in strategic communication from American University. So, hey, DC, going from, I guess, the north to south. Love that. And I'm also a fellow communication major. So love that. We'll have a great, productive, communicative listening conversation. But yes. Sydney, welcome. I always like to start having the guests introduce themselves. I did a little bit of that for you, but could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to pursue a doctorate in communication?
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about media and communication and mental fitness today. And so basically, I'm originally from West Virginia. So I was close to DC. And then my family came down to the greater Houston area. So we've been in Texas for a while. That's my tie to here. So I did my undergrad at Texas Tech. I went and did my master's at American, and now I'm back at Texas Tech. But DC has a special place in my heart, and I miss it every day. I pursued a degree originally in communication studies because I was interested in human communication, how people talk to each other about their relationships, how they pursue and make it through or don't conflict. And I realized really quickly that there's a missing element when we don't consider media in some aspects. And so I started incorporating media studies and media strategies. And then when I did my master's in strategic comm, kind of swung even further towards that media side of things. But now I've kind of leveled out at the middle. And so my goal in pursuing a PhD is to work on scholarship and expand knowledge in areas that bridge the gap between our understanding of human communication and media communication.
No, frankly, it's so interesting, Sydney, because perfect timing, because I've had 3 weeks, probably the past 3 weeks of just, I have seen, and as a communication major, and this is no shady communication, this is probably my own stuff with myself, I was like, what's a communication major? Like, why do I need to study communication? Isn't that just what people do, is communicate? And I realized that, particularly, first off, one, I feel like you're probably studying leaps and bounds what I studied, not that I'm that old by any means, but just of where technology has gone. And we know that academia is sometimes a little behind in that standpoint. So, I've experienced very well-grown adults not know how to communicate with each other. And this is, and I also am, can work on communication, but I don't think that people realize the importance of the integration, or I guess just the intertwine of communication and mental fitness, mental wellness. Because frankly, if we had communication in a sense, or better communication, then you would not necessarily have conflict, or you would be able to have those tools to confront someone about something, or, take what you want. And with communication comes listening. So take what you want from media communication, and then also maybe discard the rest. So I find it fascinating and so relevant, the work that you're doing, particularly with where we're at right now. And so I'm curious, what kind of research Can you describe some of the current research that you're working on?
Sure. So I work mainly in a triad of body image, interpersonal communication, and social media. So sometimes I'm studying all three, sometimes just two, sometimes it's just one. But usually I'm looking at the connections between those. So that would be anything like how does heavy use of TikTok impact adolescence? You can think about how much time households were spending on TikTok during the pandemic and how it's still kind of got a hold on our young people and teens and tweens, right? So it hasn't gone anywhere. But how has that changed for them in the last 2-3 years? There's so many questions we can ask there. And then again, because I focus on body image, a lot of what I do is social media and popular media versus something like more traditional forms of news media or movies, television.
So I'm curious, like, and I'm going just back to my place in the library. So are there a lot, are you sometimes, are you creating some of these things in real time, right? Like, are you creating some of this research like yourself and aggregating data because of the fact that if there was a study conducted 10, 15 years ago, TikTok didn't exist. So are you taking kind of communication theory, like the crux of communication theory, and then kind of digitally transforming or layering on the digital transformation onto that? Just kind of curious more about how you're, doing all that.
Absolutely. So I think, and you'll know this, like having studied communication studies, if you study something and focus on it, you take it in totally differently in your everyday life. So instead of just going about your day and having conversations, you're doing that, and then on top of that you've got this layer of knowledge where you're like, oh, that's exactly what I was reading about the other day, or though that fits right into that theory I was looking at a month ago. So the way that I consume media is almost always like, what data am I looking at, right? Not just what information am I getting as a person, but what information am I getting as a professional. And so you have to think, is what I'm looking at something that is public data that I could pull right now and keep without getting any previous permission? And in cases like news articles or Reddit, which is a public forum, you can pull stuff in real time, keep it, build an archive, and you've got it right there. Whereas if you're reading private posts, like you had to be given permission to access an account, like a private Instagram account or a private Twitter, you had to be more careful about doing that in real time. So just considerations about ethics come first, and then what the question might be comes second. And oftentimes I find myself going back to something about a month later when time has passed and collecting data then.
It's interesting because from someone who does a lot of dives into, and not so much anymore about personas, but from a standpoint of available data, it's not like you could go and evaluate teens, maybe TikTok, but you couldn't go and evaluate like, that's private information. So I think to your point, it's probably doing a lot of kind of like real time like having conversations with people and kind of probably using more case studies and then applying that to communication theory. But I just find all that kind of fascinating. How'd you come about to researching subjects like the connection between media and body image? And then what have been some of your kind of overall findings so far?
Sure. So my interest in studying body image came around a little bit later after my interest in social media. So I was noticing that if we wanted to think about how media were impacting young people, sticking to investigating what television shows or movies they were watching wasn't actually a full picture of their media diet, right? What they're taking in every day. And they have a really high concentration, usually, of social media use. And so trying to incorporate that into how we see them interpret the world, right? It's a lot of perceiving and kind of being, once, twice removed from the situation. What can we tell about how this media might be impacting their lives? And the more I looked at their social media use and the more I asked teens and emerging adults so up to about 29, about their media use, the more I realized that there was this kind of recurring theme of self-esteem and self-worth and body image and social comparison. And so I started focusing in on that. And so that was something that met my goal going into the program of doing research that was applicable in real life, that was going to be able to help people. So beyond academia and beyond doing research, what can we do that's actually going to make a difference? And then also listening to them and what they wanted to talk about. So it was, my goal is always to do participant centered research. What they want to talk about was body image. So I said, all right, I'm going to listen. I'll do what I can with that. Some of my overall findings, I would say, kind of fall into two categories. One, that people are aware that media use impacts their body image, but when you ask them to describe what that looks like or give it a valence, like is it positive, negative, neutral, it's usually the first time or one of a few times that they've been asked that. So they think about it a lot, they're hyper aware of it, but then when they have to verbalize it, it's almost kind of stunning to them. And they think, well, yeah, I can see how that has impacted me. And actually, I'm thinking about it for the first time. So seeing them in real time go through that is something that occurs pretty frequently for me. And then the second would be that people tend to fall into two camps when I talk to them about their media use. And there are people who are like, I use media a lot. I think it affects me a lot. And then there are people that are like, I hardly use media at all. I don't feel affected by it at all. But in reality, I think a lot of people fall more towards the middle. So being able to gauge and assess the impacts that they're actually facing can be really tricky. And even people who have been trained in media literacy and trained in how to assess media impacts can have a really hard time self-reporting and saying, yeah, here's what's going on in my mind and in my life, because so much of it occurs subconsciously.
I mean, you hit on a couple points there in regards to like media consumption. And then also, which I love with your standpoint is like, and again, I don't know if I'm using subjective or objective in the right standpoint. So just tell me which one in regards to what I'm about to say. So you're taking your conversations. I think this is subjective. You're taking your conversations with others and basing rather than taking, because I always think at the end of the day, it's important to like have a purpose and something that you deeply kind of care about, but at the same time, not putting your own bias on it. And I find a lot of the time these days, and particularly with people around what you should and shouldn't do, and people only come to the table with their own perspective. And so for you, what I love and why academia and people who have a PhD is so important is because you're using it based on actual research, and you're using samples of different people where, of course, it's not like the end all be all, but you're not making it objective. Am I using objective and subjective in the right place here?
So I think what we're saying, like subjective would be it's coming from the place of opinion, and then objective would be like, okay, here are the stats about how many people are reporting this.
So I am going to flip that. So I meant objective the first time. Sorry, listeners, objective, and then subjective the second time, because that's what I was like. Because at the end of the day, it's like what you're doing is you're taking something that's going on where it's like media, but it's there's such a right now we have such a divide. Well, I'm not affected by media. I don't go on it. I'm like, you're surrounded by media all the time, like you definitely use media to some degree, right? So I don't think it's necessarily like the good or bad. Like TikTok can be, entertaining in a sense, but what kind of filters, what kind of experience are you creating for yourself on your phone to make sure that it is fueling you and not draining you? So I think that that's interesting too. How media is contributing to your mental health, right? So I'm curious from a positive and negative I'm not, you don't have to go to positivity or answer at you may, but I'm curious how you've tied the subject of mental health like into your research and how the media is contributing to the ways we understand mental health.
So I think when we do body image and I start asking people initial questions about what they think body image is, how they might see that in the media, immediately they jump to the body positivity movement. Those are words they're familiar with. They have an idea of what that is. So there are media movements that they're familiar with. But I'd say one of the positive things about access to media and mental health is that you're not limited to just what the popular media is and the things that kind of come across your timeline organically, but you have the opportunity to access other takes or movements or opinions. And so, for example, in that case, I'd say the body neutrality movement, which instead of body positivity is this idea that's like, you have to love yourself the way you are. You're perfect the way you are. That can be a really big leap for people who are like, I don't feel that way at all. Whereas body neutrality is this idea that I'm grateful that I was able to get up this morning. I may not love the way my legs look, but like I can use them today to do the things I like to do. So there's a middle ground for people that they can access because they have access to media that they may not see in their day-to-day life. They're more likely to encounter a friend sharing something about body positivity, which is a much more well-known movement, than they are about body neutrality. But because you can kind of tinker with the algorithm and what you're being fed, you can find alternatives that are going to meet you where you're at and maybe help you grow and feel benefited, versus feeling like I'm stuck with the messages that I just have immediate access to. And then on the flip side of that, right, that could be negative as well, right? If you're just getting all of these recurring kind of popular messages and they affect you really negatively, you may not seek out any other messages. And you may say, okay, that's it. That's what's out there for me. It's really toxic for me to be consuming those things. I'm just going to shut the world out. But we have to have connection with other people, be that in person and or online, but we also have to have connection to what's going on in the world around us and kind of a sense of something that is beyond just what we are feeling or controlling in that moment. And so I think depending on what you're taking in and how you use the tools at your disposal, you could be impacted really, either way by your media use.
No, you just hit the nail on the head, Sydney, because I move around a lot during everything because I have very bad ADD. So my listening face could be looking over at the birds, but I'm definitely listening. I think that you really hit a big point here is the body positivity movement, like rather than this whole thing of the aspect of what is right or wrong. There's so many people who have like these mental health advocates or just nutrition advocates, all these people. It's like that worked for you. Our body is made up very differently. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes down to who you're following, what you're consuming, what are you letting in and what are you just not even consuming and just seeing, right? And the thing about it is what I love about the body positivity is it's groundedness, right? So if you're grounded, then you can look at if you're grounded, then you can see, I'm just saying, like if it's a news piece around something that is like could be necessarily a trigger, but you're grounded and you know that like this is not affecting me. Like it's because I think we're in a sense where people, and if they want to do that, that's fine, but they block out the negative, anything negative, which in my opinion, in this world, is impossible to do, because if you block that out, then you're really not like, it's still there, right? But if you're grounded and you have the kind of layers of what you're going to let in here or in here versus what you're just going to return back to the media world, I think that just plays a huge aspect into just our overall well-being. And I'm so curious from like, again, a non-biased perspective, like that's what I think the message from a communication standpoint um, should be put out just more and more, because there's so many like experts out there that you could get lost in someone's advice and it could be completely fueled just based on their own personal experience, and that could be really dangerous.
Absolutely. And there's, I think, such a difference between giving somebody this picture of like, I want you to get to this point eventually, and actually I'd like you to just jump there, versus saying, here's where you're at, here's something that's a feasible next step, and then there's a next step beyond that and a step beyond that. Giving people tools that they can use and equipping them to address their mental health in a way that feels feasible, is going to be way more impactful in the long run, and something that you can keep up and maintain, versus, okay, I'm just going to make this giant leap and then it's kind of exhausting and startling, right? So when you're thinking about, use the term mental fitness earlier, I think those are connected.
Totally. So kind of going into, you already pivoted to it, talking about mental fitness, and that's really one of our uh, main just themes throughout our organization. And I'm curious, how would you define mental fitness in your own life? Because with that said, with the research that you're doing, you're probably exposed to so much um, information as well. So I'm curious, how you define mental fitness in your own life, and then how do you think it differs from just mental health?
Mhm. So I'm thinking, when I hear mental fitness, my mind goes to self efficacy, right? So maybe not that you are as mentally fit as you will be in your whole lifetime at this moment, or, you're having the best day ever, you're feeling great, but that you have a sense of what is feasible for you to accomplish that day. And so if you've been, really down or really anxious, or you've been feeling, like your mental health isn't where you want it to be, that probably is going to impact your sense of self efficacy. Whereas if you're feeling good and you feel grounded and like you can kind of cope and manage things that come up every day, then you're probably feeling more, like you are able to have some kind of control, or ability to set out and accomplish the goals that you have for yourself.
Yeah. And I also think that another thing we spoke about with guests before is like mental fitness ebbs and flows. Like if you're always like this, what's wrong? Like, not what's wrong. I mean, something, my partner, he's like this, but I mean, that took years of work. And I think, I think it's being able to then, and excuse my French, but I like this one. And actually, we had a guest, Jason Cormier, use this. You either sit in your shit, you get out of your shit. So it's a matter of how fast can you get out of your shit, right? So to the point of like, if you're feeling down, how fast can you get out of that to keep it moving? Because of course we're going to have adverse feelings. We're humans, but do you want to sit in it or do you want to get out of it? Because I don't really like sitting in it. I like to be a happy-go-lucky person. So I think, being able to kind of take, if you're in a situation, take that and then be able to kind of throw it aside is important. So that's an interesting and aligned with some of the aspects of some other guests. So I do want to hop around here where, being a part of Gen Z, because I love talking about the different generations. That's why half the time I spend on Instagram Reels is because I love to see, like, it's mostly just millennials and Gen Zers. But you got some Gen Xers in there, and then like a baby boomer here or there. But I'm curious, being a part of Gen Z, do you think your generation's pushing media to approach like kinds of topics in a different way?
I think so. I'm technically kind of like, we'll call it like Z-llennial, right? I'm like
Yeah, yeah,
cusp.
yeah,
I'm late.
yeah.
I'm late Gen Z. So like my portion of Gen Z has been consuming and creating media for a while now, and then of course we're seeing kind of the younger end of Gen Z, doing that as well. But they of course are consuming things that I didn't even have access to, right? So things change so quickly, and the kind of like meme culture and humor and all of that changes so quickly. So it's really interesting to see what media looks like today. And then I think a year from now, being able to compare kind of what those generational trends are will be really interesting. But that being said, I think the more people are producing media that come from kind of a shared experience, in this case, it'd be the shared generation and then the time and the culture and the historical timeline location that they're at, they're going to have so much in common, and their media is going to reflect that. And I'm hoping and seeing some evidence that there is a much bigger focus on mental health among media created by Gen Z. And I think part of that is just what they have been invited to talk about and feel comfortable talking about and welcome to discuss, whereas other generations have been asked to suppress those things.
I mean, suppression. Yeah. I mean, literally, I look at my parents who are boomers. I'm like, okay, like you have definitely suppressed those feelings. And I'm like, it's still time left. You still have like half your life still to live, or like, probably a good amount of it, if they stay healthy. So it's like, by the end of the day, it's like, I think we're being forced to at a younger age to not suppress those things, like, and not suppress those feelings. And it's coming out in different forms. And I think we have more of a voice than, perhaps older generations. But I think it's also at the same time recognizing and respecting all the generations at play, and more so teaching our older peers rather than kind of, not saying rebelling, but like kind of being like, well, this is the way. It's like, well, they have a lot of perspective too. They just didn't grow up with the same tools that we did. And I just find it so fascinating because, I was at the brink of like, Instagram was probably when I was in college, it was starting. But technology was like around when I was little, but it's not like we had like that thanky video camera that like we, had to like, it was such a process, right? Like watching videotape. And I look at my nephew now and, we hold up the phone and we FaceTime, and I'm like, he sees himself in this screen. Like he likes looking at himself on a phone. And I'm like, that's crazy that like, he's almost 1 year old and is seeing himself like this. It's like, and again, how does that start? If you're seeing yourself in all these different places where it's like, listen, I don't remember being in, the only time I can tell you about being in photos when I was little was probably like school photos, which were always such a mess. And then also like just random albums where like it was, but now going back to kind of the point with body image and body positivity is that there's filters. There's so many ways you can see yourselves and compare to others that I personally think it's like, you have to be grounded and feel beautiful within yourself, because there's so much consumption out there, and just even aspects of what you can put on, it's just, that is so different from when we were growing up. So I think that's just interesting. And just to kind of wrap up a little bit here, just because I would go on for an hour with you, but we have our listeners who don't have as much attention span these days. I'm kind of curious because I know that you're probably consumed with just a bunch. And I'm curious, like, as a full-time doctoral student and instructor at the university, how do you flex your mental fitness muscle?
So I made the genius decision to start my PhD in the fall of 2020, which was like the worst time to do that. So I was online. I was taking my classes online and teaching online, and basically was Zooming 8-9 hours a day plus, and then reading and writing the rest of it, and just at my desk in my house. Like getting cabin fever, right? And was like, man, I can't sustain this, right? Like the stress level, the kind of warped sense of time, like all of that was just a really big obstacle towards me, like even feeling like happy and like well and like as a person, and certainly as a student, right? So at that point I was like, okay, what can I do to kind of build a routine for myself that's going to bring me some kind of balance, and scheduling out my time really carefully, being really conscious of taking time away from screens and from looking at media is really important, especially when you study it, but also spending time with friends outside of academia that aren't going to want to talk about work, and and just trying to really be intentional with where I allotted my time made such a huge difference for me. And so now I feel like balance and being really cognizant of where I'm devoting my attention and my energy has been something that has really increased my mental fitness. And I actually get to do more of the things that I like. I actually work more efficiently, being focused on that balance versus trying to cram as much work in and get as much done as possible.
Totally. I actually would probably agree with you there, where, I mean, I just felt like COVID was just like a long winter, and I have like seasonal depression. So like, and I wouldn't say, I think it was just like, there was no sense, like you had to create your own routine, because if you didn't, then you could probably have gotten just lost in work because it's in front of you. I mean, I even have trouble because I work from home. Like, I have my Peloton next to me, and that's like my workout. And it's funny, if my like partner comes in, I'm like, literally, this is my gym. I don't walk into the gym. Like, I literally, there's different corners of the house that like really just operate as different. Like, the couch is my relaxation. Like, this is your relaxation place when you come home. So my point is, it's like, I have to create the boundaries and routine, just like to your point, or you could just get consumed. And then also though, like turning off the noise and having those boundaries and energy, because everyone, like, people are on different routines and different whatever. So if someone's going to be pinging you, or you have to, someone pinging at 8:30, and you're like, well, I'm not like, bye, that's not, I find that, people always have different answers to this question. And, you could take a walk, you do whatever, and that could work. But frankly, I'm on it with you. It's boundaries and energy management and like routine and time. Like, that's it. Cause then you can make more. No one else, when people complain about like being busy or like blah, 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 or I don't have this, like, that's on you. Like, that is on you. You know what I'm saying? Like, you create your own day. So I love that response. That's probably one of, I think I've heard routines, but I don't think I've heard it to the stance of like, that aspect of like the energy. So I love that. So anything that you wanted to leave with the audience before we wrapped up today, Sydney?
I would say, like, when people ask me what I study and I tell them that I study media, they kind of like jerk their head back right there. They have this response where they're like, oh, cool, I have questions. Or they're like, oh, no, I don't want to talk about that. And it was like you said, media is everywhere around us all the time. And the more we understand about something, the better our relationship with it can be. So I'd say, like, go do your research, go find some kind of media literacy thing that you like, or your favorite popular media, and think about how it shapes your life. And you might develop your own interest in media studies and communication.
Well, I mean, it's everywhere. That's why I'm like, it's communication. And it's like, no, 110%. And it's like, you can't escape it. If you want, you're going to live in a hole, and that's fine. But then when you have conversations with others, like the other day, when I had extra hours in my day, I just researched some stuff going on with current events. So then when someone says something, even if I want to talk about it or not, I know what's going on, Yeah. So Sydney, it was so great having you. I hope you stayed cool today in the 103 weather in Texas, but we will definitely catch you next time, and would love to hear more, offline about some of your studies. But yes, we have Sydney Brammer. She is a doctoral student at Texas Tech University, but also was up here in DC to get her undergrad. So again, Sydney, such a pleasure. I'm your host, Jen Sherman of Mental Recess, and we will catch you next time. Thank you for tuning into another episode of We Are Everyone. You can subscribe to We Are Everyone on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and also be sure to visit www.pivotalmoments.org to learn more about the organization. And we also want to hear what mental wellness means to you. So you can follow us on social media, submit your video, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much.